I would rather lose everything I own than marry that woman, said Maddox, Duke of Dunhaven, and he set down the letter as though it had burned his fingers. Everything, Corliss. The house, the lands, the name they are so eager to sell. Let them take it all before they set a bride at my table like a dish I never ordered. The old butler did not flinch. Corliss had served 3 dukes of Dunhaven and buried 2 of them, and he had long since learned that his master's anger was a thing to be weathered rather than answered, as one weathers a storm off the moor by standing very still until it passes overhead. He merely folded his gloved hands and looked at the fire, which had burned low in the great grate of the study while the Duke read. The Countess of Harrowden, Corliss said at last, will not be easily refused, your grace. The Countess of Harrowden, Maddox repeated, and the name came off his tongue like something rotten. He rose from the wide oak desk that had belonged to his father, and to his father before him, and he crossed to the window where the November rain came sideways against the glass. Below, the drive of Dunhaven Court glistened black and empty, the great avenue of limes bare-branched and dripping, and beyond them the county rolled away grey to the grey horizon. All of it his, all of it a weight he had carried alone for 11 years. She has decided that her goddaughter shall be a duchess, and she has decided that I shall be the making of it, and she has written to half the shire to say the thing is as good as settled. She thinks that because I am proud I will not suffer the scandal of a refusal. She has mistaken the depth of my pride. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulder, and where other men of his years had begun to soften he had not. The hard riding and the long solitary walks had kept him lean and severe. His face was a handsome one, or had been before the grief set into it, dark-browed, clean-jawed, with a mouth that had forgotten how to be easy. There was a scar, faint and silver, that ran from the corner of his left eye toward his temple, got in a fall from a horse the same black winter he had lost his wife, and folk in the county who had never dared ask about it invented a dozen Cruella stories to explain it. It suited them to believe the Duke of Dunhaven was as dangerous as he was rich. He had never troubled to correct them. A man left alone by his reputation was a man left alone, and being left alone was the nearest thing to peace he had known since Eleanor died. That was the reason, though he would have said it to no living soul, not even to Corliss who had known him since he wore short coats. Eleanor had been his marriage of the heart, made against every counsel of prudence, and she had lived 18 months as his wife and died in a childbed that took the child with her. He had held her hand and promised her the world, and the world had proved a liar, and he had sworn over her cold fingers that he would never again put his happiness into the keeping of another, for the keeping of it had nearly killed him. 11 years he had held to that vow. He did not intend to break it for the Countess of Harrowden's goddaughter, nor for any woman the world tried to press upon him like a poultice on a wound that had healed as much as it ever would. There is a further matter, Corliss said, in the careful voice he used when the news was worse than the news already given. The Countess does not merely write, your grace. She comes. Her carriage was seen upon the Kelvedon road not an hour since. She will be at the door before the light is gone. Maddox turned from the window. She would not dare. She would dare a great deal, I think, to see her goddaughter settled. Corliss inclined his head a fraction. And she brings the young lady with her. For a moment the Duke said nothing at all. The rain ticked against the glass. Somewhere in the deep house a door closed, and a maid's quick step went along a passage and faded, and the fire settled with a small collapse of ash. Then Maddox laughed, though there was no mirth in it, only a kind of grim astonishment at the effrontery of the thing. Then she shall have her wasted journey, he said, and a cold answer to warm her going home. Have Mrs. Yaxley make up rooms. I will not turn a woman out into the wet, whatever else I refuse her, and have a supper laid, and let there be no want of civility under my roof. But understand me, Corliss. He came away from the window and stood over the low fire, and the light of it climbed the hard planes of his face. There will be no courtship in this house. There will be no bride. Whatever the Countess has told the county, whatever hopes she has kindled in that poor girl she drags across 3 counties in the rain, I will put out tonight. I would rather the name of Dunhaven end with me than be bought and sold across a supper table. Do you understand me? Perfectly, your grace, said Corliss, who had understood him for the better part of 40 years, and who thought though he was far too well trained to let it reach his face, that a man who declared a thing so loudly, and so often was a man not half so certain of it as he wished to be. The Countess of Harrowden arrived as promised, in the last grey smear of daylight, and she arrived as such women always do, in a great commotion of wheels and steaming horses and a footman running with an umbrella that the wind at once turned inside out. Maddox watched from the top of the stairs, unwilling to descend before he must, and so it was from that height that he first saw them come into his hall, the Countess sweeping in vast and imperious in plum-coloured silk, her voice already loud in complaint of the roads, the cold, the length of the way, the incompetence of postboys. And behind her, quieter, a young woman in a plain grey travelling cloak dark at the shoulders with rain, the Countess he had expected. The Countess was exactly the article her letters had promised, a woman who filled a room the way water fills a jug, taking the shape of whatever contained her and pressing hard against its sides. She shed her wet things upon the arms of his servants, without so much as a glance at their faces. And she looked about the great hall of Dunhaven with the frank appraisal of a woman valuing furniture at auction, and when she caught sight of the Duke upon the stairs, she cried out his name and his title together in a voice of triumphant welcome, as though he were the guest and she the host. But it was the girl he found himself watching. She had put back her hood, and she stood a little apart, as those in her position learned to do, neither pressing forward to be noticed nor shrinking so far back as to seem sullen. She was not a beauty in the way the county reckoned beauty. She had none of the pink and white insipidity that passed for it at the assembly rooms, but there was something in her face, a steadiness and unhurried composure, that held his eye against his intention. She was young, 3 or 24 at the most, with dark hair drawn simply back and a wide, grave mouth and eyes that, even at that distance, seemed to be taking the measure of the house and finding it neither more less than a house. When one of the maids fumbled the sodden weight of the Countess's furs and nearly dropped them, it was the girl who caught them, quietly, and set them right, and murmured something to the maid that made the frightened creature's shoulders come down from about her ears. No one else in the hall marked it. Maddox marked it. "Your Grace," boomed the Countess, mounting 2 steps toward him with a hand pressed to her heaving bosom, "you cannot conceive the horrors of the Kelvedon Road. I declare we were like to overturn a dozen times. But we are come at last, and I have brought her to you. Come, child, do not lurk there in the wet like a drowned thing. I have brought you my Sabra." "Netherford," said the girl. It was the first he heard her voice. It was low and clear and entirely without the tremor he might have expected of a young woman presented, without ceremony, to a duke in his own hall as a thing brought for approval. She said her own name plainly, as one lays down a coin of known value, and she made her curtsy a good curtsy, neither too deep nor too grudging, and she looked up at him from the foot of his stairs with those grave dark eyes, and she did not blush, and she did not simper, and she did not look away. "Sabra Netherford, your Grace," she said, "I am sorry to come upon you unlooked for. It was not my choosing." "Not your—" The Countess gave a little laugh, high and hard, and swept on before the words could be examined. "La, what a thing to say! She is shy, your Grace, only shy. She has not been much in the world, poor child, being left as she was, but she has the sweetest disposition, the very sweetest, and accomplishments you would not credit in a girl so plainly bred. She draws, she plays. She has read a great many books, which I have told her 100 times a gentleman does not thank a wife for. But there, we shall mend all that. Now, you will forgive an old woman who has been rattled half to death upon your roads if she asks directly for her fire and her supper." "Both are prepared," said Maddox. He came down the stairs at last, because there was no help for it, and he did not offer the Countess his arm, because he had already resolved to offer this household nothing that might be mistaken for warmth. But he inclined his head with a cold and perfect courtesy that had frozen bolder guests than she. "You are welcome to Dunhaven for the night, madam. Corliss will show you to your rooms. We will speak, I think, after supper, when you are rested, for I fear you have made your journey under a misapprehension, and I would not have you make the return journey under the same." He had meant it to land. He had chosen the words to land, courteous enough to give no cause for outrage, cold enough that a woman of any perception would read the whole of his refusal in them, and be spared the indignity of hearing it spoken aloud. The Countess, being a woman of no perception whatever where her own wishes were concerned, chose to hear only the welcome and none of the warning. She beamed and pressed his hand and said he was all that was gracious, exactly as his late dear father had been, and swept off after Corliss in a rustle of drying silk, calling back over her shoulder for her girl to follow. But the girl did not at once follow. She stood a moment yet at the foot of his stairs, and Maddox, turning to go, found her looking at him with an expression he could not immediately name, not hope, which he had braced himself against, nor the mercenary calculation he had expected, nor the flutter of a girl in the presence of a title. It was, he realized, something nearer to pity, as though she saw the whole of the situation as clearly as he did, the ambitious old woman, the reluctant Duke, the girl herself dragged between them like a parcel, and pitied not herself in it, but him. "You need not trouble yourself, your grace," she said quietly, so that only he could hear it. "I know what my godmother has told the county, and I know it is not true, and I have known it a great deal longer than you. She has decided that I am to be your wife. I have decided nothing of the kind. I did not consent to be brought here, and I will not consent to be married off like a heifer at Michaelmas Fair, to you or to any man, whatever my station and however little the world thinks a girl in my position may pick and choose." She paused, and the smallest thing that was not quite a smile touched the corner of that wide grave mouth. "So you may keep your cold answer for after supper, if it eases you to give it, but I thought you had better know tonight that there is nobody here who wants the thing but her. It seemed unfair to let you spend the whole of your evening arming against a siege that was never laid," and she made him another small curtsy, entirely correct, and turned and went up his stairs after her godmother, leaving the Duke of Dunhaven standing alone in his own hall with the rain at the windows and the queerest sensation he had felt in 11 years, the sensation of having marshalled the whole of his strength against a door and put his shoulder to it and had it open softly from the other side. Before ever he pushed, he stood there rather longer than he meant to. A log broke in the hall fire. Corliss came back down the stairs, having settled the Countess, and found his master where he had left him, staring up the empty flight with a face that the old butler had not seen upon him since another woman climbed those same stairs long ago. "Will there be anything further before supper, your grace?" Maddox roused himself. "The girl," he said. "Netherford. What do you know of her?" "Little, your grace, beyond what the servants' hall has gathered from the Countess's woman on the road. Her people were gentry once in Suffolk, but the money went. The father a younger son who speculated and lost, and died of it, and the mother not long after. She was taken in by the Countess as a kind of companion, some 4 years since, reads to her, manages her correspondence, suffers her tempers, a pause delicate as a footstep on ice. The servants' hall is of the opinion that the young lady is used a good deal harder than a goddaughter ought to be, and paid a good deal worse than a servant would stand for. A poor relation, Maddox said, a dependent. Nothing at all in the world's account. Nothing at all, your grace." Corliss hesitated, which he rarely did, though I will say, if your grace permits, that in the quarter hour since her arrival she has thanked 2 of the maids by name, and asked the boy who took the horses whether his hands were not frozen, and refused to let anyone carry up her own small trunk, saying it was no weight and she had legs of her own. It is not, if I may speak plainly, the conduct of a young woman come to siege to a duke. It is the conduct of a young woman who has learned to expect very little, and to make no trouble in the getting of it. The observation hung in the warm air of the hall. Maddox said nothing to it. But he did not contradict it either, and that, in a man so quick to contradict, was itself a kind of answer. The Duke was silent. He thought of the girl catching the dropped furs, and quieting the frightened maid, and saying her own name like a coin of known value. He thought of that clear low voice telling him, in his own hall, with the perfect composure of one who had nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to fear, that she wanted no more of this marriage than he did, she, who by every reckoning of the world ought to have grasped at a duke as a drowning creature grasps at a rope. He had come down those stairs armed to refuse a scheming girl. He had not been prepared for a girl who refused first. "See that she is comfortable," he heard himself say. Not merely correct, comfortable, a good fire. Something hot brought up if she wants it. She has been on the road since dawn in the wet, and I will not have it said that a guest under this roof was used as her godmother uses her. Very good, your grace. If Corliss found anything remarkable in the instruction, 40 years of service kept it from his face. He bowed and withdrew. Alone again, Maddox went back into his study and stood before the low fire and picked up the Countess's letter from the desk, where he had thrown it down, that letter full of arch hints and heavy meaning, the whole clumsy siege of it laid out in a lady's careless hand. He had meant, an hour ago, to burn it. He found now that he did not burn it. He stood turning it in his fingers while the rain came against the glass and the great house settled into its evening quiet around him, and he told himself quite firmly that nothing whatever had changed. That he would say his cold word after supper as he had always meant to, and put the Countess and her goddaughter on the Keldon road at first light, and have his solitude back and his peace and his silence exactly as before. He told himself so several times, and under the telling, faint and unwelcome as the first thaw water working under winter ice, ran the memory of a wide mouth almost smiling, and a voice that had pitied him, and the strange unbalancing truth for the first time in longer than he could name. He found that he did not, after all, want the evening to end. The morning brought her into his house whether he willed it or not. Maddox, Duke of Dunhaven, stood at the tall window of his study and watched the carriage roll up the gravel sweep, and he told himself, with the same flat certainty he had told his butler the night before, that no arrangement contrived over port and old debts would ever put a ring upon that woman's hand. Let her godmother scheme. Let his late father's promises rise up like ghosts to shame him. He had buried better men than the memory of that bargain, and he would bury this too. Yet he did not step back from the window. The footman handed down first the godmother, the Countess of Heroines, in plum silk that strained across her like a sail, and then a younger woman in a gown the grey of a dove's wing, plain, well-kept, and 3 seasons out of fashion. She did not wait to be handed down. She set her own gloved hand on the carriage door and stepped to the gravel with the unhurried steadiness of someone who had learned long ago not to expect a footman's arm, and having stepped down, she looked up, not at the great pediment above the door, not at the 8 ranks of windows that had made grown men falter on this very drive, but straight along the front of the house until her eyes found his. She saw him. He was certain of it. And she did not look away, and she did not simper, and she did not drop into the flustered half-curtsy that women performed for the windows of Dunhaven as though the stone itself might grant them favour. She simply held his gaze for the length of one breath, the way one honest person acknowledges another across a crowded room, and then she turned to attend her godmother. Maddox found that his jaw had set. It was an old habit and a useful one, and he was displeased to discover he had need of it before the woman had crossed his threshold. Corliss announced them in the green saloon a quarter of an hour later, when the Duke had composed himself into the cold and courteous instrument that had put an end to 100 unwelcome interviews. He did not rise fully. He inclined his head from the great chair by the cold hearth, and he let the silence do its practised work, while the Countess of Heroines folded herself onto the settee and began at once to talk. Your Grace is too good entirely, to receive us soon after, well, after everything. The godmother's fan fluttered. I said to Sabra in the carriage, did I not, Sabra, that a gentleman of your Grace's breeding would never let a foolish misunderstanding cloud what our dear departed fathers so wisely, madam. Maddox did not raise his voice. He never needed to. I think we may spare ourselves the fiction that anything was misunderstood. My father made a promise. I did not make it. I have said, and I will say plainly before your goddaughter so that she need waste no hope upon it, that I do not intend to honour it. He had meant the words to land like a closing door. He watched them land. The Countess of Heroines' fan stopped. Her mouth worked. A flush crept up her powdered throat, and she began some fluttering protest about honour and the dead and what the county would say. And through all of it Maddox kept his eyes, not on the godmother, but on the young woman in dove grey who sat straight-backed at the settee's end with her hands folded in her lap. Sabra Netherford did not flush. She did not flinch. She did not turn her stricken face to her godmother for rescue as any sensible fortune-seeker would have done. She looked at him with a steadiness that was almost restful, as though he had said something she had long expected to hear, and was rather relieved to have finally heard aloud. "Then we are agreed, Your Grace," she said into the first gap her godmother left for breath. Her voice was low and even and entirely without heat, "for I do not intend to honor it either." The fan clattered to the carpet. The Countess of Harrowden made a small strangled sound. Maddox, who had spent 20 years cultivating a face that gave nothing away, felt one eyebrow rise before he could govern it. "You surprise me," he said. "I cannot think why." "Your Grace has just declared before witnesses that he would sooner be thought a man who breaks his father's word than take me to wife. I should be a poor creature indeed to sit here and pretend I found the prospect wounding." She tilted her head, and something in the tilt was almost, not quite, amusement. "I have been an object of charity in 3 houses, Your Grace. I know the difference between a woman a man does not want and a woman a man is determined to be seen not wanting. You are at some pains to be seen. It is a great deal of trouble to take over a nobody." The room went very still. The Countess of Harrowden began to gabble. "Sabra, my love, you must not. His Grace did not mean. You will forgive her. She is overwrought." But Maddox lifted one hand a bare inch off the arm of his chair, and the godmother's flood dried at the wrist. "Leave us," he said. "Your Grace. You wished me to consider your goddaughter. I find I cannot consider her over the noise. Cullis will take you to the yellow room. There is Madeira." He did not look at the godmother at all. "Go." It was not done. A young woman left alone with a gentleman, unwed, undeclared. It was the sort of thing that ruined girls of far better standing than Sabra Netherford. The Countess of Harrowden knew it. Her eyes darted between them, greedy and afraid, calculating whether a compromise engineered was better or worse than the outright refusal she had just heard, and greed won, as he had known it would. She gathered her plum silks and her fan and her offended dignity and let Corliss lead her out, and the door closed, and the two of them were alone in the cold green room. Maddox waited for it. The soft plea, the sudden tears, the lowered lashes, the trembling confession that she had never wished for any of this, the small helpless hand extended toward his mercy. He had seen every variation. He had grown so weary of them that wariness had hardened, somewhere in the years since Eleanor, into a thing that felt very like contempt for the performance, for the appetite it served, for the man he had once been who had believed a lovely face when it told him it wanted nothing but him. Sabra Netherford did none of it. She bent, retrieved her godmother's fallen fan from the carpet, set it neatly upon the settee, and folded hands again. "You sent her away to frighten me," she observed, "or to tempt me. I have not decided which you think you are doing. Have you not? If it was to frighten me, Your Grace has miscalculated. A woman with no reputation to spend cannot be robbed of it." She said it without a scrap of self-pity, the way another woman might remark that it looked like rain. "And if it was to tempt me, to leave me alone with a duke and let my imagination furnish the rest, then you have mistaken me for my godmother, who would indeed be furnishing rapidly. I am the poor relation, Your Grace. I was brought along to make the numbers and to be grateful. You may return me to the carriage whenever it suits you, and I shall be no worse than I came." Maddox rose from his chair. He had not meant to. He crossed to the window instead of toward her, which was a small mercy to his pride, and he stood looking out at the grey autumn park, where his father had taught him to ride, and where he had learned, later and more painfully, everything else. Behind him the fire was dead in the grate. He had ordered it left cold that morning. A warm room invited people to linger. "You are very ready," he said to the glass, "to tell me what I want. Most people spend a great deal of effort telling me what they think I wish to hear. That is because most people want something from you. I have already been told I shall not get it." A pause. He heard the settee's frame creak faintly as she shifted. "It's a strange freedom, Your Grace, having nothing to gain. One finds one can simply say what is true. I recommend it, though I imagine it is harder to come by in your position than in mine." He turned. She had not moved to soften him. She sat exactly as before, straight and grey and composed. And the pale autumn light from the window fell across her plain face and found in it nothing that the fashion plates would call beauty, and everything that Maddox, against every wall he had spent a decade building, found he could not stop looking at. There was no art in her. That was the thing that unmoored him. He had lived so long among people who arranged their faces the way they arranged their drawing rooms, for effect, for advantage, that he had half forgotten a face could simply mean what it showed. Hers meant it. When she said she found the prospect of him neither frightening nor tempting, she was not fencing. She believed it, and the believing of it, he discovered, stung more sharply than any flattery had reached him in years. "You spoke of Eleanor," he said, and then heard himself and stopped. He had said no such name aloud in this house in 6 years. "I did not," Sabra said gently. "You did near enough. A moment ago your face did something it did not mean to do. I have made my living reading faces, your grace. Dependent learns it or she does not eat. Some grief walked across yours when you looked at me and waited for me to weep prettily, and I did not oblige you." She looked down at her folded hands, and the first time something in her stillness gave, not toward him, but inward, some private carefulness. "I will not ask who she was. It is not my affair, and you would not thank me. I only mean to say, whatever she taught you to expect of women who want your name, I am not here to teach it to you again. I do not want your name. I find, on the whole, I do not much want either. It has never done me a kindness." For a long moment the Duke of Dunhaven, who could silence a table of peers with a lifted brow, could find nothing whatever to say. He thought absurdly of Miss Sybil Larkspur, who had sat in this very room not a fortnight since, arranged upon that same settee like a confection upon a plate. The Larkspurs held the next estate and a fortune to match, and Sybil had been schooled from the cradle in the art of being wanted. She had laughed at exactly the right moments, at exactly the right pitch. She had praised the Titian in the long gallery, which no one had told her was a copy, and praised it so prettily that Maddox had not had the heart or the cruelty to correct her. She had let her glove slip and waited, with the patience of a good angler, for him to retrieve it. Every motion of that lovely, practiced girl had been a hook baited with his own vanity, and he had sat through the whole hour as a man sits through a play he has seen too many times, admiring the staging, moved by none of it, counting the minutes to the interval. He had not once in that hour forgotten for a single breath that he was a duke and she wished to be a duchess. It was the entire subject of the room, though neither of them named it. And now here sat a woman in a dove-grey gown with a mend at the cuff so neat it might have been ornament, who had made him forget it entirely, who had spoken to him as though his coronet were a fact about him no more interesting than the colour of his coat. Sybil Larkspur had spent an hour telling him, in 100 graceful ways, that she saw a duke. This one had looked at him across the gravel, and he understood it now, with the slowed clarity of a man reading his own sentence, had simply seen a man, and had not been especially impressed, and had told him so. It ought to have offended him. He waited, with something like hope, for it to offend him. It did not. She had walked straight through the middle of his oldest defence as though it were not there. He had built the cold and the distance and the flat refusals precisely so that no one would ever again come close enough to disappoint him, and here was a nobody in a 3-season gown who had refused him back before he had finished refusing her, who wanted nothing, who read him like a broadsheet, and who had spoken his dead wife's name into the air with more tenderness than he had managed for it himself. "You are impertinent," he said at last, and was appalled to hear that it came out not as rebuke but almost as inquiry. "I am honest, your grace." In a poor woman the two look very alike, and the difference is decided entirely by whether the great person listening is in a mood to be flattered or told the truth. The corner of her mouth moved. "You do not strike me as a man much flattered. I thought you might, for once, prefer the other thing." He came away from the window. He did not sit. He stood over her closer than was wise, close enough to see that her composure was not the marble it pretended to be, that there was a pulse beating quick and visible at the base of her throat, that she was not, after all, as unmoved by the great cold duke standing above her as her level voice insisted. She had chosen the level voice. She was holding it in place by force of will, and the will of it was the most beautiful thing he had seen in longer than he cared to count. "Tell me the truth, then," he said. "You did not want to come here. No, your godmother made you. My godmother feeds me. It amounts to the same thing." She lifted her chin to keep his eye, since he had made her look up at him, and she did not let herself be made small by it. "But I will tell you a truth you did not ask for, since we are trading in them. I expected to despise you. I had heard a great deal on the road about the cold Duke of Dunhaven who would not marry, and I had made up my mind to find you exactly as cruel as report, so that I might dislike you comfortably for the whole wretched errand. A breath. It is a great inconvenience to me, your grace, that you are not cruel. You are only wounded, and pretending very hard that it is the same thing. It is not the same thing. And I have not the least idea what to do with a duke who is merely sad, so I would take it as a kindness if you would go back to being frightening. It would make the carriage ride home considerably easier. The Duke of Dunhaven laughed. It came out of him rusty and unpractised and wholly against his intention, a short, startled sound that he had not felt the shape of in years, and he saw her own eyes widen at it, saw her surprise that she had surprised him. And for one unguarded instant they were not a duke and a dependent at all, but only two people who had told each other the truth and found it unexpectedly good company. He mastered it at once. He stepped back. He put the cold on again like a coat, because the alternative frightened him far more than any woman's tears ever had. You may tell your godmother, he said, and his voice was even again, that I have not changed my mind. I will not marry you. I never supposed you would. But you will dine here on Thursday. She has angled for the invitation since Michaelmas. Give it to her and be done. I find, he chose the words with great care, and still they betrayed him, that I have not finished being told the truth. Sabra Netherford rose. She was a good deal smaller than he, and she did not pretend otherwise, and she gathered no advantage and asked for none. She only looked at him a moment longer with those steady, reading eyes, as though she were setting down in some private ledger the exact weight of what he had just failed to hide. Thursday, then, she said. I shall come and tell you the truth, your grace, and you shall stand at your window and pretend you are not listening, and we shall both go on refusing to marry each other, which is a great deal more entertaining than what most people do at these things. She curtsied, properly, correctly, not a shade too deep, and let Corliss show her out, and the door closed behind the grey gown, and the Duke of Dunhaven was left alone in his cold green room with a fire he had ordered dead, and a warmth he could not for his life account for. Standing at the window a long time after the carriage had gone, watching the empty gravel where she had looked up and seen him, he should not have asked her to Thursday. He knew it as a man knows the ice is thin beneath him and steps out onto it anyway, because the other shore is where the light is. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself he could unsay an invitation as easily as he had unsayed his father's promise. He told himself a great many steadying things, standing there, and believed not one of them, and could not, though he turned from the glass 3 separate times, make himself stalking down the empty drive. The cold word was not said after supper, nor the morning following, and by the second evening Maddox understood that the Countess of Harrowden had no intention of letting it be said at all, until she had first made the county a witness to her triumph. A wheel had been found to want mending, though the wheel had brought her 34 miles without complaint. The roads were declared too foul for a lady's travelling, though the rain had stopped in the night, and the drive lay drying under a thin sun. She would impose upon his hospitality but a day, she vowed only a day, and in the same breath she had contrived to send word to the 4 nearest families of consequence that the Duke of Dunhaven kept a small company at his table that evening, and would be gratified by their attendance. She had done it, Maddox saw, precisely so that he could not refuse them without a rudeness that would be talked of from Kelvedon to the coast, and having filled his dining room with witnesses, she meant to marry her god-daughter to him in the eyes of the county, before ever the banns could be read. By the simple expedient of behaving as though the thing were done, he should have been angry. He was a man who had made anger into a kind of fortress, and here was cause enough to man the walls of it. Yet as he stood dressing for the evening, submitting to the ministrations of his man, he found the anger would not properly catch. It smouldered and would not flame, and the reason it would not flame stood, he knew very well, 3 doors along the gallery in a plain grey gown. Having asked the housemaid that morning whether she might be spared a needle and thread to mend a tear in her only good sleeve rather than trouble anyone for it, Corliss had reported the request, the particular blankness he reserved for things he wished his master to notice. Maddox had noticed. The guests came at 7. There were the Fanshaws of Broadmere, stout and amiable and dull. There was old Sir Hector Ray, who was deaf in the left ear and turned it toward whoever spoke, so that he seemed forever leaning away in disdain. There was the widow Mrs. Copplestone with her 2 unmarried sons, and there was, brought by the Fanshaws as a connection staying in their house, a young lady named Sybil Larkspur, a golden laughing, much admired creature of 19, all dimples and ready blushes, who had been reckoned the beauty of 2 seasons and knew it to the last curl. The Countess seized upon her arrival with visible calculation, for a beauty in the room was the perfect foil. Beside Miss Larkspur's polished brilliance, her own grey goddaughter would show plain and poor and negligible. And the county would wonder that a duke should even glance the humbler way, and so, the Countess reasoned, being a woman who understood people as she understood furniture, by their surfaces, the match she pressed would seem the greater condescension and the greater favour. Maddox watched it all with the cold detachment of a man who has resolved to be entertained by his own funeral. He took the Countess in to dinner because he must, and he seated Miss Netherford far down the table among the Copplestone sons, which he told himself was a courtesy, to spare her the scrutiny of the head of it, and knew, even as he told himself so, for something a good deal less honourable than a courtesy. He did not wish to be watched watching her. That was the truth of it, and he did not care to examine the truth of it. And so he gave his attention to Miss Larkspur on his right, who laughed very prettily at everything he said, whether or not he had meant it to be laughed at, and agreed with everything he did not say, and told him 3 times in the first remove that she doted upon a large house, and could not conceive how he bore the melancholy of so grand a one all alone. "I bear it," said Maddox, "by not finding it melancholy." "Oh, but you must," cried Miss Larkspur, delighted, as though he had confided a secret sorrow, so vast and so silent, and no lady's hand in any of it. "I am sure I should weep to walk those long galleries with nobody by. A house wants a mistress, your grace, as a garden wants the sun. Everyone says so." "Everyone says a great many things," he answered, "and a garden, I have observed, does perfectly well in the shade, provided one plants for it." It was meant to close the subject, and it did not, for Miss Larkspur had not the faculty for knowing when a subject was closed, but it carried low and clear down the length of the table, and Maddox saw the grey figure at the far end lift her eyes from her plate, one brief bright glance, before she bent them down again. There was the ghost of something at the corner of that wide mouth. She had heard him plant for the shade, and she had understood exactly what he meant by it, and she was, he would have sworn, amused. The Countess, scenting a lull she did not like the shape of, struck into it. "You are too modest of your accomplishments, your grace, in the article of company. But we shall not tease you. Now, I have been telling dear Mrs. Fanshawe of the debate that has divided all the drawing-rooms of the North this winter. The great question, you know, whether it is prudence or affection that makes the surer marriage, and we cannot settle it, we ladies, we have quite worn the matter threadbare. I am for prudence, entirely for prudence. A wise match is a made match. Love, I always say, is a fire that warms a season and burns a house down. Your grace will be of my mind, I am persuaded. A man of sense is always for prudence." She had laid the trap with a heavy hand, and Maddox saw the whole clumsy machinery of it. He was to declare for prudent matches, and prudence would be understood to mean her goddaughter, and the county would carry the declaration home. He set down his glass. He was framing the cool, deflecting answer that would give her nothing, when Sir Hector, turning his good ear the wrong way and catching only the half of it, boomed down the board, "Prudence, prudence in marriage. And what should a chit of a companion girl know of prudence, eh? Best let those settle it who've something to be prudent with." He laughed at his own wit, comfortable as such men are, and there was a small dreadful silence in which every eye at the table slid, as though pulled by a single string, toward the plain young woman at the foot of it who had been named. Before them all, a nothing, Miss Larkspur's pretty mouth curved. The Countess looked pleased and pained at once, having wished her goddaughter diminished, but not quite so publicly named the poor relation she was. And Maddox, to his own surprise, felt the anger that had smouldered all day come suddenly and cleanly to the flame, not for himself, but for the girl 3 doors along who mended her own sleeve. He opened his mouth to say something that would fall on Sir Hector like a stone. He was not quick enough. Sabra Netherford had already laid down her fork. "A very great deal, sir," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so perfectly level that it silenced the table more surely than loudness could have done. "It is those who have nothing to be prudent with who must learn prudence best, for we are given no margin in which to be foolish. A rich man may marry unwisely and repair it with his acres. Poor woman who marries unwisely has spent the only fortune she will ever hold, and spent it past recall. So if the question is who understands the price of a match, sir, I should think it is not the man with a purse to cushion his mistakes, but the woman who must pay for hers in the whole of her life. I know a good deal of prudence. I have had, you see, no money with which to purchase any of the alternative." Sir Hector's good ear had caught most of it. His face went through a slow and complicated series of weathers and arrived at a baffled respect. Mrs. Copplestone said, "Well," upon a breath, and one of her sons laughed and turned it hastily into a cough. And Maddox sat quite still, with the strangest sensation climbing under his ribs, and understood that he had just watched a woman with nothing take up the very slur flung to shame her and turn it, in a single unhurried breath, into the sharpest thing said at his table in a 12-month. He should have let it rest there. She had won her point and won it clean, and a wiser man would have moved the talk to horses. But something in him, some part he had thought long since gone quiet, the part that had once, before Eleanor, before the grief, delighted in a mind that could meet his own and give him back stroke for stroke, that part woke and would not be still. "And yet," said Maddox, and the whole table turned to him now, "by your own accounting, Miss Netherford, prudence is only the counsel of those who cannot afford anything better, a grand economy of the poor. You make a virtue of it, but you make it a virtue got by force. Would you keep to it, I wonder, if the force were taken away? If a woman with nothing were of a sudden given everything, the purse, the acres, the cushion for her mistakes, would she remain so prudent then? Or is your prudence merely your poverty, wearing its Sunday coat?" It was ungenerous, and he knew it as he said it, and he said it because he wished, obscurely and for the first time in years, to be answered, to be met, to see whether the thing that had spoken so cleanly a moment ago could stand against a harder push. The Countess drew a scandalized breath, delighted to see her goddaughter set a test she must surely fail before the county. Miss Larkspur watched with bright expectant malice, certain of a rout. Down the table the grey figure looked at him a long, level moment, and did not flush, and did not falter, and something kindled far back in those dark eyes that he would afterward think was the beginning of everything. "You ask whether my prudence is only my poverty in its Sunday coat," she said. "It is a fair question, and I will give you a fair answer. I do not know. I have never been rich, so I cannot swear to you what I should be if I were, any more than you, your grace, who have never been poor, can swear you would keep your generosity if you were stripped to my condition tomorrow. We none of us know the whole of ourselves. We know only the part our circumstances have troubled to show us. But I will tell you this much. A virtue got by force, kept year on year against the wish to break it, until it is worn into the very grain of a person, I am not certain that is a lesser virtue than one that costs its owner nothing. You honor the man who is generous out of his abundance. I have more regard for the one who is honest out of his want. The first has only obliged himself, the second has overcome himself. And if my prudence began as my poverty, your grace, why then, so did a good deal of what the world is pleased to call the wisdom of the great. It only began, in their case, so long ago and so far up the ladder that they have forgotten they ever had to climb. There was no sound in the room at all but the small settle of the fire. Maddox became aware that he had leaned forward across his own table. He became aware that Sir Hector was staring at the girl with his mouth ajar, that Mrs. Fanshawe had forgotten the syllabub upon her spoon. The Countess's triumphant face had gone slack and uncertain, sensing that her weapon had turned in her hand and cut the wrong way, though she could not for her life have said how. And he became aware, most of all, that Sabra Netherford was looking at him with the very smallest lift at the corner of her mouth, not the simper of a woman who has pleased, but level glinting satisfaction of a fencer who has touched her opponent square upon the breast and stepped back to see whether he felt it. He felt it. He had not, in 11 years, felt anything so keenly. "You reason," he said slowly, like a woman who has been contradicted a great deal and got very good at it. I reason, your grace, she returned, like a woman who has been contradicted a great deal and permitted to answer very seldom. It is a novelty to me to be allowed the reply. You must forgive me if I have made rather too full a use of it. And she inclined her head to him, grave and courteous and entirely unrepentant, and picked up her fork again, and returned to her dinner as though she had merely passed him the salt. Miss Larkspur, seeing the current of the table turned clean away from her, made a bright bid to recover it. How very clever, she said, with the particular sweetness that is meant to be heard as its opposite. But then a lady in Miss Netherford's situation must be clever, I suppose, poor thing. It is quite the only portion some of us are left. For my part, I have always thought a woman may be too clever by half. Gentlemen do not care for it, whatever they may say at the table. They like it in the dining room, and they do not like it in the house. Do they not? Said Maddox, before he had decided to speak at all. He turned to Miss Larkspur with the cold, courteous face the county had learned to dread. I cannot answer for gentlemen, Miss Larkspur. I can answer only for myself, and I find that I've been bored at my own table for the better part of a decade, and that I am not bored tonight, and that I know precisely to whom I owe the difference. I should think a man who could not care for cleverness in the house had better take care never to be alone in it, for cleverness is uncommonly good company on a long winter, and beauty, I am told, keeps somewhat less well. He had not meant to say the half of it. It went further than his intention by a mile, and it landed in the room like a dropped tray. Miss Larkspur's pretty colour went first white and then a furious pink. The Countess made a sound of pure confusion, and at the foot of the table Sabra Netherford lifted her eyes to his once. And this time she did not look away, and neither did he, and the moment held between them across all the length of the board, and all the ruin of the Countess' scheme, until the widow Mrs. Copplestone, God bless her tactless soul, asked loudly whether they were to have any music after. And the spell broke, and the table remembered how to breathe. Later, when the ladies had withdrawn and the port had gone round and the county gentlemen had taken their bewilderment home along the drying roads, Maddox stood alone in his study before the low fire, exactly where he had stood 2 nights before, and found the room greatly changed for holding all the same furniture. He had meant 2 nights ago to say his cold word and have his silence back. He had not said it. He was further from saying it now than he had been at the beginning, and he knew it, and the knowledge did not trouble him half so much as it ought. Corliss came in with the tray. A successful evening, your grace, by all appearances. A disastrous one, said Maddox. The Countess set out to sell me a match, and instead her goddaughter routed the whole of my company single-handed and left me looking like a man well pleased to be routed. He turned the empty glass in his fingers. Do you know, Corliss, she took Ray's insult, took it up off the floor where he threw it, and made it the best thing said in this house since my father's day. And when I pressed her, meaning, I am ashamed to say, to see her stumble, she did not stumble. She answered me as I have not been answered since. He stopped. Since her grace, your grace, said Corliss quietly. Maddox did not deny it. He set down the glass. I gave her the far end of the table to keep her from being stared at, he said, and I have thought of nothing else the whole evening but that I could not hear her better. That is not the conduct of a man about to send a woman down the Kelvedon road at first light. No, your grace, agreed Corliss, gathering the glasses. It is not, and if there was beneath the perfect gravity of 40 years' service, the very faintest warmth of a satisfaction long deferred, he was far too well trained to let it reach his voice. But Maddox, standing before his fire with the strange unruly gladness of the duel still singing in his blood, heard it all the same, and for once in his life had not the least wish to reprove it. The last of the candied fruit had been cleared, the ladies had risen and drifted, and Maddox found himself doing a thing he had not done at his own table in years, inventing a reason to leave it. The dinner had gone very much as he had feared and hoped in equal measure. He had seated Sabra Netherford halfway down the board, below the Larkspurs, below even the vicar's wife, in the place her station demanded and the Countess of Harrowden's ambition resented, and he had watched from the head of the table as she was talked over and talked past and served last, and had watched her bear all of it with the same unbothered grace. She might have shown a shower of rain. and then, twice, 3 times, she had said a quiet truthing into a lull, and each time the table had swung round to it like a compass finding north, and each time Sybil Larkspur, seated in radiance at his right hand and schooled from the cradle to hold a room, had felt the room slip and had reached, with a brighter laugh and a prettier turn, to take it back, and had not quite managed it. He had sat between the two of them for 2 hours, the confection built for exactly this, and the plain grey woman who wanted none of it and had found his eye going, again and again and against all discipline, down the table to the mend at a dove-grey cuff. Now the drawing-room doors stood open and the company was arranging itself for cards, and the Countess of Harrowden was steering her goddaughter toward a corner where she might be conveniently forgotten, and Maddox heard his own voice cut across the shuffle of the room. Miss Netherford has expressed a wish to see the long gallery. She had expressed no such wish. She had not, in fact, spoken to him directly since the soup. Corliss, the branch of candles. The Holbein cannot be seen by this light, and she will be gone before there is another evening to show it. It was clumsy. He who had turned away foreign ministers with a phrase heard how clumsy it was, and did not care. The Countess of Harrowden's face performed a rapid and unlovely arithmetic. The impropriety weighed against the prize, the same sum she had done in the Green Saloon, and settled the same way, and Sybil Larkspur's lovely mouth set for half a heartbeat into a line that was not lovely at all. Maddox marked it and dismissed it. He was already at the door. Sabra came because she could not, before the whole county, refuse a duke his gallery. She came a careful 2 paces behind him with her hands folded, and Corliss went before them with the light. And when they had passed out of the warm noise into the long cold corridor, where the Dunhavens hung in their varnished ranks, the Duke stopped and turned, and said to his butler, "Leave the branch on the console. I will see Miss Netherford back." Corliss set down the candles and bowed and went, and his careful footsteps died away toward the drawing-room, and they were alone again, the second time, and this time by no one's contrivance but his own. For a moment she did not follow. She stood in the doorway between the warm room and the cold one, and he saw her look back once toward the drawing-room, toward her godmother, toward the safe, dull corner where a poor relation was permitted to exist unremarked. And he understood that for her this corridor held no adventure, but only hazard, that a woman with nothing to spend still had one thing left to lose, and that he was asking her to carry it out into the dark on nothing but his word. Then she stepped through, and let the warmth close behind her and came. "There is no Holbein," Sabra said. "There is not." He clasped his hands behind him. "There is a very indifferent Lely and a great many Dunhavens who died disappointed. I lied to my butler and to your godmother and to a room full of my neighbours because I found I could not sit another quarter of an hour listening to Miss Larkspur admire things while the one person at my table with something to say was being handed the smallest cutlet. He heard the intemperance of it and stopped. You did not eat enough. I ate exactly what a poor relation is given, your grace, and I am used to the portion. It is you who did not eat. I watched you push a very good pheasant about your plate for the better part of an hour, which is a great waste. For it was the best thing on the table, and your cook will grieve." She moved past him a little way down the gallery, into the reach of the candles, and looked up at the nearest canvas, a Dunhaven in a black doublet with a hard mouth and Maddox's own grey eyes. "Your grandfather?" "Great-grandfather. He hanged 2 men for poaching in the year of the bad harvest and built the almshouses the same summer, and could never afterward understand why the village did not love him. He has your eyes. He has my temper. I am told I have grown into it." Maddox came to stand beside her, not too near, the width of a civil distance between them, and the candlelight threw both their shadows long and joined upon the polished floor. "You did something at my table tonight that I have not seen done in this house. I am sure I gave no offence. You gave a great deal of offence, and none of it to me. When Mr. Larkspur pronounced upon the folly of educating the labouring poor, and the whole table nodded as it always nods, you asked him, very mildly, whether a man who could not rid his own lease was better protected from his landlord or worse. And Larkspur, who has never in his life been asked a question he could not buy his way past, went the colour of his own claret, and no one at that table will forget it, and neither, I confess, shall I. He was aware that he was smiling and made no great effort to stop. Miss Larkspur changed the subject to the Italian opera. Rather quickly. Miss Larkspur has been very kind to me, Sabra said, with a gentleness he could not for a moment read. She told me in the withdrawing room that grey was a wonderfully practical colour, and that she quite envied me not having to trouble over fashion. She meant it as balm. It very nearly was. A small breath that was almost a laugh. She is not unkind, your grace. She is only frightened, though she would die before she showed it. She has been made into a thing whose whole worth is whether she is chosen, and tonight she is not sure she is being chosen, and that is a terror I would not wish on her for all her silks. I know something of being a thing whose worth waits on other people's choosing. Maddox was quiet. He had been prepared, walking her out here, for many things, for her wit, for her steadiness, even for the pull of her that he had stopped pretending he did not feel. He had not been prepared to be shamed on Sybil Larkspur's behalf by the woman Sybil Larkspur had condescended to. "Tell me," he said, and the command had gone out of it. It came as near a request as his voice knew how to come. "You said the first day that you had been an object of charity in 3 houses. Tell me the 3 houses. She looked at him a moment, weighing, he thought, not whether to be honest, she was always honest, but whether he had asked to know her or merely to be entertained by her misfortune as men of his rank were entertained. Whatever she found in his face seemed to satisfy her. She turned and walked slowly on down the gallery, and he walked with her, and she told him, evenly, without a single reach for his pity, as though she were reciting the provenance of a picture. "My father was a clergyman with a small living and a large heart and no head at all for money. He died when I was 11 and left my mother and me a great many books and a great many debts, and the books were sold to pay the debts, and there was still not enough, so we went to my father's brother, who was a corn factor in Norwich and a good man and had 6 children of his own. That was the first house. My mother did the mending and I minded the little ones, and we were not unhappy, only always aware of the exact size of the space we took up in a house that had not room for us. My mother died there of a low fever when I was 15. She said it plainly, and only her hand, tightening a little on the fold of her skirt, betrayed that the plainness cost her. My uncle's wife could not keep a grown girl who ate and could not be married off without a portion. And so I was passed to a distant cousin who wanted a governess she need not pay. That was the second house, and I will not speak of it, except to say that I learned there exactly what I am worth on the open market, which is nothing, and that it is a useful thing to know young. And when the cousin's daughters were grown, I was passed again to my godmother, who feeds me and clothes me in her cast grey and takes me about to make her numbers even and to fetch her fan, and who has lately conceived the notion that I might be got rid of profitably by throwing me at the head of a duke who has sworn before witnesses he will not have me." She stopped and looked up at him, and the candlelight caught something bright standing in her eyes that she did not let fall. "That is the 3 houses, your grace. It is not a tragedy. Half the poor women in England could tell you a worse one over the same cup of tea. I tell it to you only because you asked, and because I think you asked honestly, and I have found honesty is a coin one ought to give back when it is offered, being so rarely offered at all." They had come to the great window at the gallery's end, where the last grey of the dusk was going out over the park, and Maddox stood looking not at the park, but at her, the strong plain profile against the fading light, at the throat where he could see, again, the quick betraying pulse she governed so fiercely, at the whole composed, unbeautiful, brave fact of her, and he understood, with the quiet finality of a lock turning, that he was undone, not charmed as a man is charmed by a clever guest. Undone, as a wall is undone when the water has been working at its foot for a long season and one ordinary morning it simply is not there. "You said you learned what you are worth on the open market," he said low. "You were told a lie. It is not a lie. I have no fortune, no family that will own me, no beauty that men write verses to. I am 25 and I mend my own cuffs. The market is very clear on the point. Then the market is a fool, and I have spent my life among fools and never known it until a fortnight ago." He had not decided to say it. It was simply true, and being true it came out of him the way the laugh had come out of him in the Green Saloon, unpractised and past stopping. I have had women of great beauty and great fortune arranged before me in this house like plate for my inspection, and every one of them wanted the coronet and dressed it up as wanting me, and I saw through every one of them and was made colder by the seeing. And you want nothing I have, you have told me so to my face, and I believe you, and I find, his voice roughened, and he let it, I find it is the wanting nothing that has done for me. You are the first person in 10 years to stand in this house and see the man and not the Duke, and I did not know until you did it how starved I was to be seen. She had gone very still. The composure held, but it was a held thing now, visibly held, her hand pressed flat to the window frame as if she needed the cold stone under it. Your Grace should not say such things to me, she said, and for the first time since he had known her, her voice was not quite even. It is not kind. I am not a woman who can afford to be made sport of, and you are a duke who has sworn he will not marry, standing in the dark with a dependent, saying the sort of thing that turns a foolish head. Mine is not a foolish head. But it is a head, your Grace, and it beats, and you are being very unfair to it. I am not making sport of you. He turned to her fully. They were close now. He had not marked the moment they had drawn close, but the civil width was gone, and he could see the single loose strand of dark hair at her temple and the fine tremor she was fighting in her lower lip. Sabra, I have never in my life meant a thing more plainly. I do not know yet what I am to do with the meaning of it. I have made vows, I have made them loudly, I have made them a fool of myself before half the county, but I will not stand here and let you tell yourself I am toying, because that is the one thing I'm not. Look at me and tell me you think I am toying. You read faces, Teat. Read mine. And she did. She lifted her grave grey eyes to his and read him as she had read him across the gravel that first morning, unhurried, exact. And he stood and let himself be read to the floor of him, holding nothing back for once, no cold, no distance, no lifted brow, and he watched her find in his face the thing he had put there, and watched her believe it, and watched the believing frighten her far more than any cruelty could have done. His hand came up. He did not decide it. It came up and his fingers touched, barely, the loose strand of hair at her temple, and tucked it, the lightest thing, the ghost of a thing, back where it belonged, and his knuckle grazed the warm skin below her ear, and she drew a breath that shook going in, and neither of them moved. And the whole vast cold house held its breath around them in the dark, the two shadows joined upon the floor, and the last light dying in the glass, and it would have taken so little, so very little, to close the last small distance that remained. He did not close it. He was a duke who had sworn an oath before witnesses, and she was a dependent alone with him in an unlit gallery, and one motion more would take from her the last thing she owned that was wholly hers, her power to walk out of his house no worse than she came. He would not be the man who took it. He let his hand fall. He stepped back, and it cost him more than any refusal he had ever spoken, and he saw in her steadying breath that she understood exactly what he had done and exactly what it had cost, and that it moved her more than the touch would have. I will take you back, he said unevenly, before your godmother engineers a scandal she has been praying for since the soup. Yes, Sabra said. Yes, you had better. But she did not move at once. She stood a moment more at the window, mastering herself, putting the level voice back on the way he had watched himself put the cold back on, and when she had it she said quietly, not looking at him, You spoke of vows made loudly before the county. I would have you remember, your Grace, that a man may unsay a word to a woman and be forgiven it, but a duke who unsays a public oath to raise a nobody makes himself a jest from here to London, and makes her a worse one. Whatever you think you feel in a dark gallery, the daylight will send you the bill for it. I have lived my whole life reading that particular bill. I would not have you sign it in the dark and repent it at breakfast. She turned then and gave him a small, sad, steady smile that undid him further than the touch had. Take me back to the cards, and when we are in the light again, be cold to me. It will be easier for us both. She took up the bunch of candles herself before he could reach it, and walked back down the long gallery ahead of him, upright and grey and unhurried, past the ranks of hard-eyed Dunhavens who had all died disappointed. And Maddox followed her toward the warmth, and the noise and the world that would, he already knew, send him the bill exactly as she had promised and found. As the drawing-room light fell on them and the Countess of Harrowden's greedy eyes came up and Sybil Larkspur's bright frightened ones came up beside them, that he had not the least intention of paying it, and every intention at last of ruining himself completely. The morning came up clear over Dunhaven for the first time in a fortnight, and Maddox, who had slept badly and gladly, was out of doors before the house had well found its feet. He had a thing to say, and he meant to say it in daylight, in the open air, with the dew still on the yew walk and no dining table between them and no county to watch, and he had rehearsed none of it, because for the first time in his adult life he did not wish to know beforehand what he would say. He wished only to find her. That in itself would have alarmed the man he had been 3 days ago. It did not alarm him now. He crossed the terrace with the long, unhurried stride the servants had learned to keep out of the path of, and there was, had anyone been near enough to see it, something almost light in the set of his shoulders, the look of a man walking toward a door he has at last decided to open. He found the door already ajar. It was the door of the small morning room that gave onto the rose garden, and the long window stood wide to the fine weather, and through it, before he had rounded the box hedge, before he had made a sound upon the gravel to warn them, came the Countess's voice, pitched low and quick and warm with triumph. "And I tell you it is done, child, done. I have watched that man freeze out duchesses and dowagers and every hopeful mamma in 3 counties, and I have never seen him thawed to a puddle as I saw him thawed at that table. He could not take his eyes from you. Ray saw it. The Larkspur girl saw it, poor thing, and has gone home to weep into her pillow. You have only to hold your nerve 4 days more, and he will propose before the week is out. And then, my dear, you will be the Duchess of Dunhaven, and the whole pack of them who would not give you a chair by the fire may come and curtsy for their supper. Did I not say I would make you? Did I not say leave it all to me?" Maddox stopped where he stood, in the shadow of the hedge, with the gravel cold and particular under one boot, and the sun very bright upon the other. He was not a man who listened at windows. He had gone all his life in the certainty that a thing spoken behind his back was beneath his notice, and that a duke who stooped to catch it deserved what he caught. He did not stoop now. He simply could not move, and the words came to him whether he would have them or no, and each one went into him at a particular old place, a place he had thought sealed over these 7 years, and found it not sealed at all, but only papered thinly across, and went straight through. "Propose before the week is out. Leave it all to me. I would make you a duchess." He waited to hear her answer. Some remnant of the buoyant fool who had crossed the terrace waited to hear her say the thing that would make it all a lie, waited for her honest voice to rise up clean and cut the Countess's scheming to ribbons as it had cut Ray, as it had cut him gladly across the length of his own table. He had staked, he realized, standing in the shadow with his heart going like a man's who has missed a stare in the dark, a very great deal upon what she would say next. "Godmother," said Sabra Netherford, and her voice was low, and it was steady, and it did not rise. "You must not talk so. Not here. The window is open." That was all. She shut the window then. He heard the sash come down, and after it the 2 voices went on muffled and indistinct behind the glass. The Countess still bright and busy. Sabra's a low even murmur beneath it that he could not read and did not try to. He had heard enough. He had heard, he told himself, everything. "You must not talk so, not here. The window is open. Not, it is false. Not, I want none of it. Not, I would not have him think it for the world. Only, mind the window. Only, we are overheard." The caution of a player who has looked up and seen the pit. He turned and went back the way he had come, and the morning that had been so clear an hour ago was the same morning, the same faultless sky, the same dew burning off the yew, and he could not think how he had been fool enough to find it fine. By the time he reached his study he was cold all through, and the cold was an old friend, and he was ashamed of how gladly he took its hand. He rang. He stood at the window with his back to the room and watched the shadows of the clouds walk across his park. 30,000 acres of it, and a name that went back to the conquest, and he understood at last, with a clarity that was very nearly relief, precisely what he had been to Sabra Netherford, as he had been precisely that to another woman once in another spring. Before he had learned better and then unlearned it in 3 foolish days, his late wife had been the handsomest bride of her season, and she had chosen him out of a field of 6, and he had been young enough and vain enough to believe she had chosen the man. She had not. She had chosen the coronet, and worn it beautifully, and given him 5 years of a courtesy so perfect he could never once lay a finger upon it and call it coldness, and died leaving him the knowledge, come too late and by another's careless tongue, that she had told her sister on the eve of the wedding that a duke was a duke, and one might learn in time to bear the man that came attached. He had borne it. He had built the whole grey fortress of himself upon it. And he had let one clever, penniless, overlooked girl talk him down off his own walls in 3 days with her wit and her steady eyes and her way of not looking away, and all the while behind the open window it was leave it all to me, and I would make you a duchess. Your Grace rang, said Corliss. Order the carriage, said Maddox, without turning. The travelling carriage, not the barouche. It is to be at the door tomorrow at first light, and it is to go to Kelvedon, and Miss Netherford and the Countess are to be in it. You will have their trunks brought down tonight. You will convey my compliments to the Countess and say that pressing business calls me from home, and that I cannot in conscience keep my guests kicking their heels in an empty house, and that I have taken the liberty of arranging their comfortable conveyance to the Kelvedon posting inn, whence they may go on as they please. He heard how smooth it came, how well made, the whole cruel courteous machine of it, and hated that he had the trick of it still. That is all. There was a silence behind him longer than any Corliss had allowed himself in 40 years. Your Grace, said the butler at last, and there was in the single careful word neither reproof nor question, but only a kind of grave attention, the attention of a man who has watched over a house through more than one bad night and can tell, by the sound of a bell, which sort of night is coming. Shall I understand that the arrangement is? You shall understand that I have given you an order, said Maddox. Yes, Your Grace, said Corliss, and went to give it. He might have got clear of it, even then. He had only to keep to his study, and let the smooth machine do its work, and by tomorrow's noon the road would have carried the whole business off to Kelvedon and out of his life, and he could have gone back to being bored and safe and untroubled for the rest of his allotted years. He had done as much before. He was expert in it. But he had reckoned without the one particular in which Sabra Netherford differed from every other woman who had ever crossed his threshold, and it was this, that she would not be sent down a road at first light without coming to look him in the face and ask him why. She came to the study at dusk. She did not send in her name. She knocked once and opened the door before he had answered, and stood in it with the last of the day behind her and her chin at the angle he had come to watch for, and he saw that someone, the Countess, or the trunks brought down, or the servants' faces, which never lied, had already told her the shape of the thing. She was not weeping. He had known she would not be weeping. It would have been easier, God help him, if she had wept. Your Grace, she said, I have come to know what I have done. You have done nothing, said Maddox from behind his desk, where he had put the whole broad polished breadth of it between them on purpose. You have been a most delightful guest. My debt to you for the enlivenment of a dull week is considerable. I regret only that the estate's affairs oblige me to cut short a visit I would gladly have. No, she said. The single word stopped him, as her single words had a way of doing. She came a little into the room. She was in the plain grey she had worn the first night, the poor relation's grey, the grey the Countess had wanted to trim and she had not let her, and it caught the firelight no more kindly than it ever done, and she stood in it straighter than any silk in the county. You will not do me the discourtesy, she said, of that. I have had a week of your true speech, Your Grace, and it has spoiled me for your courtesy. I find I cannot go back to being lied to smoothly, even by you even now. Yesterday you looked at me across your own table as though. She stopped, her colour rose, and she mastered it, as though there was something in the world worth the trouble of looking at. This morning I am put in a carriage before the birds. Something is between those two things, and I have come to be told what it is, and then I will go, and gladly, and you need never trouble to be courteous to me again. He should have held his tongue. A wiser man, a colder man, the man he had spent 7 years constructing, would have bowed and said nothing and let her go furnished with no weapon but her guessing. But she was standing in his study asking him for the truth as no one had asked him for anything in a decade. And the old wound was open and bleeding, and he was, under all the granite, more badly hurt than he had been since he was a young fool of a bridegroom, and so he did the thing he had sworn he would never again let any woman make him do. He answered from the wound. "Very well," he said, and stood, and the desk was no shelter after all. "You shall have it plainly, since you will not be spared. I walked out this morning to find you. I will not tell you why. You may spare yourself the pleasure of hearing it, for it would only be another feather in the Countess's cap. And in the rose garden, Miss Netherford, through an open window, I had the singular good fortune to hear your godmother congratulate you upon your progress. 4 days more and he will propose," she said, "and you shall be a duchess. Leave it all to me," she said, as though there were a great deal to leave. "And you," his voice, which he had kept so level, went somewhere he had not given it leave to go. "You bid her mind the window. Not that it was false. Not that you wanted none of it. You bid her lower her voice so that the game should not be heard by the pigeon it was played for. I heard you, Miss Netherford. I have unusually good hearing, and I have had in my time unusually good instruction in this particular subject, and I assure you I did not mistake a word." He watched it land. He had thought, in the cold hours, that there would be satisfaction in the landing of it, that he would see the mask fall and the schemer under it and be confirmed, be justified, be safe. He saw nothing of the kind. He saw her go very white, and then worse, he saw something come up in her face that was not guilt at all, and not shame, but a still, terrible dignity that made him feel, standing behind his own great desk in his own great house, exactly 2 inches high. "So that is it," she said softly. "You built the whole of it out of half a sentence heard through a hedge. I built nothing. I repeated, you heard my godmother scheme, and you heard me tell her to be quiet, and out of those 2 things you have made me a liar and a fortune hunter and packed my trunk." She did not raise her voice. That was the dreadful part. She never once raised it. "You did not stay, your grace, to hear the rest. You did not stay to hear me tell her, as I told her, that I would not be made into anything hers or yours, that I had come to this house because I had nowhere on this earth left to be, and no bread but what she chose to give me, and that even so I would not stand at your side and let you believe I had angled for your name, because there was one thing left that was mine, and it was that you had spoken to me like a person and not a prize. And I would sooner starve on the Kelvedon road than spoil the only honest thing that had happened to me since my father died. I bid her mind the window because I could not bear that you should hear her cheapen it. And you were behind the hedge the whole time, and you heard the cheap half, and you believed it. Of course you believed it. Something moved in her throat. You wanted to. It is so much safer than the other thing. The fire settled. Somewhere in the house a clock told the half hour, indifferent as clocks are. "I have flattered no one in this house," she said, "and schemed at nothing, and I will not begin now by defending myself past the truth. You may put me in your carriage. You have the right. It is your carriage and your road and your name to guard, and I see that you have guarded it a long time and at great cost and mean to go on. But you will not, I think, have the comfort of believing me a liar, for you know I am not one. You have known it all week. It is the very thing you could not look away from. You will only have to know, after I am gone, that a woman told you the truth in this room tonight, and you chose the hedge over her face. I would not, your grace, be you holding that on the long winters you spoke of. Beauty keeps less well than cleverness, you said. I find that pride keeps worst of all. She curtsied to him, a full curtsy, correct to the last inch, the courtesy he had thrown at her flung back polished and entire, and she turned, and she went out, and she closed the door behind her without the smallest sound, which was somehow louder than any slammed door in the history of the house. Maddox stood a long time where she had left him. The fire burned down, and he did not ring for it to be mended. The window went from blue to black. And the truth she had put into the room stood there with him after she was gone, and would not be sent to Kelvedon with the rest of the baggage, and he turned it and could not make it into a lie however he tried. Because he had spent the whole of a week learning past the possibility of doubt that Sabra Netherford did not lie, and he understood, at last, standing in the ruin of his own guardedness with the carriage ordered and the trunks in the hall, that he had not been protecting himself this morning behind that hedge. He had been running. He had heard a thing that might, if he let it, oblige him to hope again, to risk again, to be a fool again, and he had seized the first cheap excuse to bolt, and called it justice and dressed it in a travelling carriage. When Corliss came at last with a candle, he found his master standing in the dark before a dead fire. "The carriage is ordered for first light, your grace, as you instructed," said the butler. "The trunks are down. Is there anything further tonight?" "Corliss," said Maddox, and stopped, and the old man waited, holding the light. "I have done a thing tonight I do not think I can undo." "Very few things are past undoing before sunrise, your grace," said Corliss quietly, "if a man is willing to be seen trying. It is only the pride of not being seen to try that makes them so." He set the candle down. "Shall I countermand the carriage?" For a long moment the Duke did not answer, and the whole house seemed to hold between the dead fire and the small brave flame upon what he would say. The candles had long since drowned in their own wax, and Maddox had not troubled to ring for more. He sat in the great chair behind the study desk where 3 Dukes of Dunhaven had sat before him, and he watched the grey come up in the eastern window without moving, because moving would have meant deciding what to do with himself, and he could not yet bear to decide anything. The fire had died to a red eye in the grate. The house was silent in the particular way a great house is silent before its servants wake, and into that silence, over and over, like a man pressing his tongue to a broken tooth, he set the word he had let fall the night before and made himself hear it again: contrivance. He had said it before the whole county, before the Fanshaws and deaf Sir Hector, and the widow Copplestone and her gaping sons, before Sybil Larkspur's frightened blue eyes and the Countess of Harrowden's greedy triumphant ones, and he had said it looking at Sabra. That was the thing he could not put down, not the word alone, though the word was cruel enough. A man might say contrivance of a scheming godmother and be forgiven it. But he had turned his head and let his cold eyes rest one instant upon the grey-gowned woman by the card table. The one woman in the room who had never contrived anything in her life but the mending of her own sleeve, and in that single look he had told a room full of witnesses that he counted her among the schemers who had hunted him these 10 years. He had done it because the Countess of Harrowden had overplayed her hand, and the county had begun to smile as though the match were made, and he had felt the old trap closing, the old sick music of being wanted for the coronet and never for the man. And in his fear he had reached for the fortress and slammed its gate, and Sabra had been standing on the wrong side of it when it fell. She had not wept. He almost wished she had. She had only gone very still, the way she went still when she read a face and found in it a thing she had long expected and hoped against, and then she had risen, and made her curtsy to the room with a composure that shamed every soul in it, and left the drawing-room without one backward glance. And he had let her go. That was the second cruelty, worse than the first, that having wounded her he had stood among his guests and let his face freeze over and said not one word to call her back, because to call her back would have been to declare himself before them all, and he had not, in the moment, been man enough. He heard the door and did not turn. Only Corliss came into the study without knocking, and only ever at this hour. "You did not go up, your grace." It was not a reproach. Corliss had served 3 dukes and buried 2, and had learned long ago the uselessness of reproaching any of them. He crossed to the grate, and knelt with the stiffness of his years, and began to build the fire without being asked. "No," Maddox said. His voice came out cracked from long disuse. "I find I had no great appetite for my own bed." The old man set the kindling and struck the light and coaxed the flame, and only when it had caught and thrown a little warmth into the dead room did he speak again, in the flat blank tone he kept for the things he wished his master to attend. "Miss Netherford asked Mrs. Yaxley last night for the hour of the morning coach from the village." He set the poker straight in its stand. She would not take the travelling carriage, though the Countess of Harrowden in a temper commanded her to. She said she would not be beholden to this house for so much as the loan of a wheel. She has accepted a situation, your grace, a place found for her some weeks since, a governess in a family near Selby, which she had meant to refuse and now means to keep. She left before it was well light, on foot to the crossroads to meet the coach at the Dun Cow. Mrs. Yaxley wept, Corliss added, with the delicacy of a man laying a knife upon the table between them, and I confess, your grace, I did not find it in me to reprove her for it. Maddox had risen before the old man finished. He did not remember rising. He stood with one hand flat upon the desk his fathers had sat behind, and he understood all at once and completely, in the way a man understands a thing he has been refusing to understand for a fortnight, exactly what he had done and exactly what he had thrown away. He had made anger into a fortress, and reserve into a coat of mail, and he had told himself for 10 years that he wore them, because the world was full of people who wanted the Duke of Dunhaven and cared nothing for the man inside the title, and it had been true. It had been true of every glittering woman the Countess of Harrowden and her kind had paraded before him, true of the fortune hunters and the coronet hunters and the mothers with their varnished daughters. And he had grown so practiced at the truth of it that when at last a woman came into his house who wanted nothing he had, who had told him to his face that she wanted nothing, and been believed, and read him to the floor of himself in an unlit gallery and frightened them both with what she found there, he had looked at her through the same visor he wore against all the rest, and struck at her as he would have struck at them, and never seen until this grey morning that the visor was not armour at all. It was a coffin. He had been 10 years lying down in it and calling it safety. "When did she go?" he said. "Not the half of an hour past. The coach comes through the Dun Cow at 8, your grace, if the roads are sound. It wants 6:45 now." Maddox was already moving. "Have Perseus brought round. Do not wait to saddle him properly. A bridle will serve. I have ridden him bare 100 times over that ground." And Corliss, he stopped at the door. The old man was watching him with something in his lined face that Maddox had not seen there in all the years of his service. Not the careful blankness, but a plain, undisguised, almost fearful hope. The look of a man who had waited a very long time to see his master do one wholly unguarded thing before he died. "Your Grace, if the Countess of Harrowden wakes and asks where I'm gone," Maddox said, "you may tell her the truth. Tell her the Duke of Dunhaven has gone to make a jest of himself from here to London, and could not be prevented." "With the greatest pleasure I have known in 30 years, said Corliss, and went to wake the stables. The morning was raw and clean, the frost not burned off the verges, the ruts of the drive ringing hard as iron under Perseus's hooves. Maddox took the beast down the sweep and out through the gates at a pace that would have broken his neck had he stopped to think of it, and he did not stop to think of anything, for once in his ordered life, but only rode. The county went by him in bright hard strokes, the bare hedges silvered, the water meadows white and steaming where the low sun struck them, startled field fare bursting up from the thorn, the moor beyond lying purple-brown under a sky washed thin and coal. He had ridden this ground since he was a boy small enough to be tied to the saddle. He knew every gate and gap of it, and he took the shortest of them, the drover's track that behind Broadmere, and came down to the Selby road a mile above the crossroads, and he prayed as he rode. He, who had not troubled heaven with a request in 10 years, that the road had not dried enough to bring the coach through early. He came down onto the highway with the horse blowing and the sweat steaming off its neck, and for one black moment the road was empty in both directions, and he thought he was too late, that she was already up upon the coach roof and gone north out of his life forever. And then he saw her. She was walking. Of course she was walking. She would not so much as sit at the crossroads inn and wait, for that would have cost a penny for the fire, and she had reckoned to the penny her whole life. She came along the verge on the far side, a small upright figure in the grey travelling cloak he knew, a single valise in her gloved hand, her bonnet plain and her step steady and unhurried on the frozen road, and the sight of her going away from him so composedly, so entirely without any expectation that anyone in the world would ride out to stop her, did something to Maddox's chest that no cannon shot could have done. He brought Perseus across the road and down to a walk, and then to a stand a little ahead of her, and swung off, and stood in the middle of the Selby highway in the cold with his horse's rein in his hand, bareheaded, having forgotten his hat, having forgotten a great many things, and waited for her to reach him. She stopped some 6 feet off. She did not put down the valise. Her face, when she lifted it, was schooled to the grave, level composure he had come to know as the truest thing about her, and only the faint colour of the walking had put in her cheeks, and the small betraying tightness at the corner of her mouth told him she had feelings at all this morning, and was mastering them at a cost. "Your Grace has ridden out very early," she said, "and I think without your hat. You will take a chill. Sabra," He found his voice was not steady and did not try to steady it. Do not be civil to me. I could bear anything from you this morning, but that you should be civil to me, as though I were a stranger who had done you no wrong. What would you have me be? She said, and now there was the smallest tremor under the level tone. I am a governess bound for Selby, and you are the Duke of Dunhaven, and there is a coach to be met. Civility is very nearly all I have left to offer you, your grace, and it is more than you offered me last night before your friends. That struck home, and he let it, and did not flinch from it as he had made a life of flinching from nothing. I know it, he said. I have sat up the whole night with what I offered you last night, and there is no smallest part of it I would not tear out of the world with my hands if I could. Will you set down that valise? I cannot make my confession to a woman braced to run from me the instant I have done. I am not braced to run, but her chin came up. I am braced to be sensible. It is a different thing, and I have had a great deal more practice at it. Say what you have ridden out to say, your grace, and say it quickly, for the sun is up and the road is drying, and I will not miss that coach. So he said it quickly. He stood in the middle of the frozen road with the steam rising off his horse and the fieldfares chattering in the thorn, and he laid himself bare to her as he had never in his life laid himself bare to any living soul. When you came into my house a fortnight ago, he said it had been 10 years a dead man who went on giving orders. I had made up my mind, long before your godmother's carriage ever soiled my gravel, that no creature living would ever again be permitted near enough to me to do me harm. Because I had learned, never mind how, it is an old and stupid story, and I was young in it, that a man in my place is a thing that is wanted, not a man who is loved, and that the surest way to keep from being emptied out by that wanting was to want nothing back and let nothing in. And it answered. God help me, it answered for 10 years. Every woman they set before me proved my rule, and every proving made me colder, and I called the cold wisdom, and I was proud of it. He drew a breath that hurt. And then there was you, who wanted nothing I had, who told me so to my face on the gravel the first morning, and never once unsaid it, not in the green saloon when I tried to make you flatter me, not in the gallery in the dark, when it would have cost you nothing to let Duke turn your head. You stood in my house and saw the man and not the coronet, and you were the first in 10 years, and I knew it. Sabra, I knew what you were within the week. I knew it the way I know my own hand. Then why? Her voice broke on it, and she stopped and pressed her lips together and would not weep. Because knowing it terrified me past all sense, he said. Because last night your godmother overplayed, and the county began to smile, and I felt the old trap shut, and in that one moment I could not tell, I would not let myself tell, the difference between being taken by a woman I loved and being taken by a scheme. 10 years of the fortress rose up in me, and I reached for the gate, and I slammed it. And you were inside the wall with me, and I struck at you as though you were one of the wolves outside it. I looked at you and I said contrivance, and I meant, in that black instant, to save myself, and there is no uglier word in the language for what I did, and I have no prettier one to give you. I was afraid. That is the whole of it. The Duke of Dunhaven, who is feared from here to the coast, was afraid of a woman in a mended sleeve, because she was the one person alive who could reach the part of me I had buried, and rather than let her reach it, I would have sent her north to Selby to teach some strangers' children their globes, and called it dignity, and died of it slowly, and never told a living soul what I had thrown into the ditch by the side of this road. The valise had slipped from her fingers to the frozen grass. She had not noticed. She stood with her grey eyes full and her composure in ruins at last, not the composure of a woman who did not feel, but of a woman who had felt too much too long and been given, this once, no reason to go on hiding it. You should not say these things to me on a public road, she whispered. You told me in the gallery the daylight would send you the bill. This is the daylight, your grace, this is the bill. And you are standing in it bareheaded, telling me you were afraid. I am paying it, he said. Now. To your face and before God and the fieldfares and any carter who cares to come along and see a duke make an ass of himself in the road, which is precisely what you warned me I should never survive, and which I find I do not care a straw for surviving. I would rather be a jest from here to London with you than the Duke of Dunhaven without you, and I have been the Duke of Dunhaven without you for exactly 1 night. I tell you plainly, Sabra Netherford, I cannot do the second of them. I have tried it. I sat up the whole night and tried it, and it cannot be done. He came the last steps to her slowly, the rein still in his hand, until there was between them the same small foolish distance that had lain between them in the dark of the long gallery. The distance he had not closed then, because to close it would have robbed her of the one thing that was wholly hers, and he saw in her wet, wide, disbelieving eyes that she remembered it too, that she had understood in the gallery exactly what his stepping back had cost him, and had loved him a little for it, even as she warned him off, and he understood that everything now turned upon whether she could believe that the man in the daylight was the same man who had spoken in the dark, and had not merely ridden out at dawn to salve his conscience before letting her go north forever. I closed that gate on you last night, he said very low, and I have ridden 10 miles across the frost to open it. I am not asking you to trust the Duke. The Duke has given you nothing but reasons to run. I am asking you to trust the man you read to the floor in the gallery. You told me once you read faces to eat, that it was the one fortune you were left. Read mine, Sabra. Read it now in the plain light, with the coach coming and nothing left to hide behind, and tell me what you find. And she lifted her face to his, there in the middle of the Selby Road, with the sun burning the last frost from the grass, and she read him. He had said the worst of it standing, hat in hand, in the low bare parlour of the Kelvedon Inn, with the mud of the whole night's riding still on his boots, and the tallow candle guttering between them on a table scored by other men's tankards. And now that it was said, he could not have taken back a word of it if the saying had cost him the dukedom. He had told her of his wife. He had told her of the coronet chosen over the man, and the 5 years of perfect courtesy, and the sentence dropped by a careless sister that had frozen him 7 winters through. He had told her that he had heard, behind the hedge, the one thing his old wound was listening for, and had run from it the way a scalded man runs from a warm hand. He had told her, at the last, in the plainest words he owned, that she had undone him, that she had talked him down off his own walls in 3 days, and he had rather stand in the wreck of them beside her than keep the whole grey fortress and be safe in it alone. And then he had stopped, because there was nothing left in him to say, and he waited, as he had not waited on any human answer in a decade, to learn what she would do with a man laid open on a taproom floor. Sabra Netherford did not answer at once. She had risen when he came in. She had been sitting by the cold grate with her bonnet already tied, waiting for the morning stage, and the sight of the tied bonnet had gone into him worse than anything the Countess had said, and now she stood very still with her hands folded and her eyes on his face, reading him the way she had read him across his own table, the way that let nothing false go by. "You rode all night," she said at last. It was not what he had braced for. "You are wet through, and you have not slept, and you have said a great many things a duke does not say to a portionless woman in a public inn." A small line came between her brows. "Sit down before you fall, your grace. I will not be able to attend to any of it if I am watching you sway." He sat. He, who had kept ministers standing, sat on a settle bench at a woman's word, and found that he was in fact very tired, and that his hands were not quite steady, and that he did not mind that she saw it. "I have not come," he said, "to be nursed." "No," she agreed. "You have come to be forgiven, which is harder, and to be believed, which is harder still, and I find I can do the first this moment and must think longer about the second." She sat down across from him, on the edge of the same hard chair she had risen from, and the candle stood between them and made of the mean little room something almost grave. "You wounded me last night. I will not pretend you did not, only to make the morning easier. You spoiled me for pretending, and I mean to hold you to your own bad influence. You looked at a week of my plain truth and chose to believe half a sentence heard through a hedge, because the half sentence let you keep your walls and the truth would have cost you them. I told you pride keeps worst of all. I stand by it." "You are right in every particular," said Maddox. "I have not come to argue you out of one word. I know you have not." She looked down at her folded hands, and up again, and there was something working in her steady face that she was not troubling now to master. "That is the difficulty. If you had come to argue, I could send you off and keep my dignity whole and ride away on the stage wit in my lap. But you have come and agreed with everything I flung at you and sat down when I bid you and told me about your poor dead wife with your voice going in a way. I do not think you have let it go for anyone living, and now I cannot be simply angry. And being simply angry was the only safe thing I had left. Then be unsafe, he said. God knows I have been since Tuesday. It is not so ill as they warn one. The ghost of a smile crossed her mouth and was gone. There, she said softly. That, do you know, your grace? That is the whole of what you have done to me, and the whole of why I would not let my godmother make me into a lure for you, because you spoke to me like that, as though I were a person quick enough to catch what you threw, and not a chair to be set in a corner, nor a face to be married for the getting of an hair. No one had done it since my father died. I found I would rather ride away with that one honest thing unspoiled than stay, and let it be turned into a scheme, and have even the memory of it cheapened. I told my godmother so. You did not stay to hear it, but I will say it to you plainly now, since we are being plain. I did not angle for your name. I would have gone from your house tomorrow having angled for nothing, and grieved the loss of a conversation more than the loss of a coronet, and that is the truth, and you may take it or leave it on the road to Kelvedon. I take it, he said. I took it last night in the dark, after you had gone. That was the misery of it. You left the truth standing in my study, and it would not be sent to Kelvedon with the trunks. He leaned toward her, and the candle flame stood between his face and hers and did not waver. Sabra, I know you did not scheme. I have known it, as you said, all week. It was the very thing I could not look away from. Hear me, then, past the forgiving. I did not ride through the night to beg your pardon and see you onto a better carriage with my conscience eased. I rode to ask you to be my wife. Not to save you, you will not thank me for that. And you are right, and I withdraw the word before you say it. Not because your godmother wills it. She may take no feather for this cap. I would have her told so. I ask because a fortnight ago I swore before my own butler that I would sooner lose everything I had than marry the woman thrust upon me. And I meant it with my whole cold heart. And then you were thrust upon me, and I find I would now sooner lose everything I have than fail to marry you. That is the sum of what you have done. You have made a liar of every word I swore. She had gone very white, and then the colour came up in her face all at once, and she pressed her folded hands harder together, as though to keep them from doing something on their own account. You must not say it in an inn, she said unsteadily, at dawn, having not slept, only because I am about to be gone and you cannot bear a door to shut. Men say a great deal in the last 5 minutes before a coach that they would give the world to unsay by noon. I will not hold you to a dawn. Then hold me to daylight, said Maddox, and rose, and went to the small dirty window and put back the shutter, so that the grey Kelvedon morning came into the room and lay flat and honest across both their faces with nothing kind or flattering in it. There. It is daylight. It is the plainest light this shabby town affords. You may see every year and every fault of me by it, and there is no candle to soften a word. I say it again in it. I have no wife to be rid of but the one my pride invented. I have no debt to pay you but the one my heart owes. I want no beauty to hang on my arm for the county to envy. I want the woman who told me pride keeps worst of all and was right. Marry me, Sabra Netherford. Not the dukedom. I would strip it off and stand here plain Maddox if the thing could be done. But the man you would not stay to see cheapened. Marry him. For a long moment she did not speak, and he stood in the grey light and let her look, and did not once look away, having learned at last from her the whole art and courage of not looking away. And then she rose too, and crossed the little room, and stopped an arm's length from him, near enough that he could see the wet come up bright in her eyes and be held there and not fall, because she was not, even now, a woman who would weep at a man to move him. If it were the dukedom, she said low, I could refuse you and keep my soul. Do you understand? I have refused it already once behind that window, when refusing it cost me my lost shelter in the world. I do not want your 30,000 acres. I do not want to make the mammas curtsy for their supper, whatever my godmother dreams. I would have gone hungry down this road rather than have 1 inch of it. She drew a breath that shook. But you have gone and asked me for the wrong thing, for the man. And that I cannot refuse and keep my soul, because I have wanted him since the second night, God help us both, and I am too plain a creature to pretend otherwise now that you have put back the shutter. Her chin came up in the old way, the way he had watched for across a length of mahogany. Yes. To the man, yes. Never once to the rank. You may keep the rank in a drawer for all of me. But to Maddox, who rode all night and sat down when I told him to and let me see his hands shake. Yes, and you need never ask again. He did not remember afterward crossing the last of the space between them. He knew only that her hands were in both of his, cold from the dead great and steady, as they had always been, and that he had bowed his head over them. This man who had bowed to no one in the memory of the county, and pressed his mouth to her chilled knuckles, and then to the mended cuff above them, the dove-grey cuff with the honest small stitches he had first caught his eye upon at his own table, and that when he lifted his face she had at last let one tear go, and only one, and was smiling at it as at a defeat she did not mind. He did not gather her in. There would be time, all the long-treasured time in the world for that, and the inn was public, and she had had enough this week of being cheapened. And so he only held her two hands against his heart, where she might feel how it went, and let that stand for everything, and she let it, and understood as she understood everything. "Your godmother," he said presently, and felt her huff of not quite laughter warm across his knuckles, "is in the next room, I make no doubt, listening at the join of the door and composing the letters she will send to 3 counties. "She is composing them in French," said Sabra, "for the greater elegance. You have made her the happiest schemer in England, and the maddening thing, your grace, is that she truly does love me, under all the scheming, truly did take me in when no one else on earth would, and I cannot even be as angry with her as she deserves." She drew back an inch to look at him. "You must be kind to her, not for her scheming, for the taking in. I owe her the roof that put me in your path, however she meant to use it. She shall have a dower house and a standing invitation and my lifelong weary gratitude," said Maddox, "and she shall be told, once and finally and by me, that she gets no credit for the match, because I would have made it if she had kept me from your side with a wall of fire. Let her have that letter to compose. It will occupy her for a week." And so it was done, though it was not quite all done, for Maddox of Dunhaven had spent 7 years being cold in the sight of the whole county, and he found, riding back through the brightening morning with the Kelvedon carriage turned round behind him and the tied bonnet forever untied, that he would not have his choosing whispered. He had scorned her in the open, seating her below the vicar's wife at his own board while the county watched and drew its conclusions. He would undo it in the open, and let the county draw the truer one. The chance came Friday, at the Larkspur's own assembly, the last great gathering of that long week, to which all the neighbourhood had come to see whether the Duke would at last be caught and by whom. He had not meant to go. He went. He came in late and alone, and felt the whole bright room turn and hush, the mammas doing their arithmetic, Sybil Larkspur poised at the head of the floor in a gown the price of a farm, everyone waiting to see toward which quarter the great cold prize would incline. He crossed the room through the parting of it, and he did not incline toward the head of the floor. He went the length of the whole assembly to a plain grey figure standing where such figures are made to stand, near the door and the draught, and the chaperones' chairs. And he stopped before Sabra Netherford, and he bowed to her as he had bowed to no duchess in that room in 10 years, a full bow, correct to the last inch, the courtesy she had once flung back at him polished and entire, given now in earnest before them all. "Miss Netherford," he said. Pitched it, he who never raised his voice, so that the farthest corner of that hushed room should carry it clean. "Will you do me the honour of the next 2 dances, and if you can be brought to overlook a great deal, of every dance thereafter that I am spared to stand up for? I have asked you once in a bad light. I ask you again in a good one, before better witnesses than a tallow candle, so that no one in this county, and here as I went, once without haste, down the bright length of the room and back, shall ever again make the mistake of seating you below your worth. I have made it. I am done making it." The room did not breathe. Somewhere a mamma's fan stopped. Sybil Larkspur's lovely face performed, for one naked instant, the same rapid and lovely arithmetic the Countess of Harrowden's had performed a week before, and then, to her lasting credit and his mild surprise, resolved itself into something almost like relief, as of a girl set down at last from a horse she had never wished to ride. And Sabra looked at him a long moment in the blaze of 100 candles, plain grey against all that silk. And he saw that she knew exactly what he had done and exactly what it had cost his pride to do it in that room, and that she treasured it not for the raising up, but for the plain fact that he had chosen to be seen trying, which was the one thing his butler had told him a man could never do too late. "I will, your grace," she said, and gave him her hand, "though I warn you I dance no better than I flatter." And the room let out its breath in a rush that was half a sigh and half, from the honester hearts in it, something very like a cheer. And he led the overlooked woman out into the middle of the floor where all the county could see her, and the fiddles struck up, and he found that he had been wrong about that too, for she danced very well indeed, or else he had simply never before had a partner he could not look away from. They were married from Dunheaven before the leaves turned, and the Countess wept becomingly and took what credit she could get, and Corliss stood at the church door as the carriage came away and permitted himself, once, a smile. But the image the Duke of Dunhaven carried longest was none of the grand ones, not the assembly, not the church, not the county's late curtsies. It was a smaller thing from a night that winter, when the great house was snowed close and the fires roared, and he came into the library and found his Duchess in the poor relation's grey she had never quite let him buy her out of, curled in his own chair with a book, and looked up at him with the steady clever eyes that had talked him off his walls and never once looked away. He crossed the room and sat on the arm of the chair, and she leaned her head against him without a word, and the snow came down past the black windows, and Maddox, who had once sworn before his butler that he would sooner lose everything than marry the woman thrust upon him, sat in the warm ruin of his fortress with the whole of his world tucked warm against his side, and knew, past any hedge or any doubt, that he had lost nothing at all, and had been given, late and undeserving and grateful to the marrow, everything.